The crowd at the gala buzzed with excitement, the lights glimmering, and the laughter echoing across the lavish venue. Yet, in the midst of the celebrations, Chijioke stood alone in the shadows. He watched as Mr. Okoro, the man who had once humiliated him in the most public and cruel way, stood center stage, basking in the applause of his admirers. But Chijioke wasn't here to celebrate Okoro's success. No, this was the moment he'd been waiting for. The man who had ruined his life was about to face the consequences of his actions, but not in the way anyone could imagine. From the corner of his eye, Chijioke saw the first signs of Okoro's downfall. An uncharacteristic tremor in the businessman's confident stance, a subtle change in his expression. Okoro's carefully constructed empire of power, wealth, and influence was crumbling, and Chijioke had orchestrated it all. But how? And why? As Okoro continued to smile, unaware of the silent storm brewing around him, the audience had no idea that the very thing they admired was on the verge of collapse. And that was just the beginning. Years earlier, when Chijioke was a man full of hope, ambition, and a bright future. He had been close to everything, his career, his reputation, and his future all intertwined with Okoro. They had been business partners, friends even, until that fateful day when Okoro had brutally betrayed him. In front of family, colleagues, and mutual friends, Okoro made sure that Chijioke was humiliated in the worst possible way. The betrayal was more than just professional, it was personal. Chijioke had trusted Okoro with his life, his dreams, his aspirations. But in one swift moment, everything was taken from him. Okoro had accused him of embezzlement, making false claims that devastated Chijioke's career. His reputation was shattered, and his integrity questioned. The fallout was catastrophic. His family turned their backs on him, friends distanced themselves, and his business partners abandoned him. In that moment of public disgrace, Chijioke made a vow: he would get revenge, but not in the way people expected. He would wait, plan, and execute it with precision. Over the following years, his life became consumed by this singular goal. Time passed, and with each passing day, Chijioke's desire for retribution grew. He'd been broken once, but now he was ready to take back what was rightfully his. The sting of public humiliation was unbearable for Chijioke. His life, once filled with promise and ambition, had come crashing down after Okoro's betrayal. His career, which had once seemed limitless, crumbled overnight. No one wanted to do business with him anymore, not after the scandal. His reputation, once pristine, was now tainted beyond repair. Friends turned their backs, colleagues whispered behind his back, and even his family, though supportive at first, couldn't hide their disappointment. The fallout was swift, harsh, and merciless. Chijioke became a man without a place. The bright future he had envisioned was now a series of shattered dreams, each one more painful than the last. He found himself wandering the streets, aimlessly, trying to escape the suffocating weight of his own failure. It was easy to get lost in anger and despair, to lash out at those who had turned their backs on him, to seek instant revenge. But something in Chijioke refused to fall into that trap. Revenge, he realized, wasn't just about acting out of anger. It had to be calculated, patient, and precise. He needed to learn from his downfall, to understand how he had been defeated, and how he could ensure it would never happen again. Instead of reacting impulsively, Chijioke became a silent observer. He watched the world around him as his once loyal circle moved on without him. He watched Okoro, who had reveled in his victory, continue to climb the social ladder, unaware that Chijioke was quietly studying every move he made. From the outside, it looked as though Chijioke had given up, but in reality, he was using this time to rebuild. It was during these months of self-imposed exile that Chijioke understood the most crucial lesson: revenge wasn't simply about getting even. It was about regaining power. Revenge had to be a means to an end, not a fleeting moment of satisfaction, but a long, enduring reclaiming of what had been stolen from him. Chijioke's first step toward transformation was changing his appearance. He couldn't walk back into the world he had known as the same person. The face that had been a symbol of defeat needed to be erased. He changed his hair, his style, and even his mannerisms. More than just cosmetic changes, he began to shift his mindset. He sought new skills, understanding the world through the lens of a strategist, not a victim. He devoured books on business, psychology, and power dynamics. He learned how to read people, how to manipulate situations, and most importantly, how to control his emotions. Chijioke understood that emotions, anger, sadness, even joy, could be used to manipulate, but they could also make him vulnerable. Power, he realized, was in control. The more control he gained over himself, the stronger he became. This reinvention wasn't just physical or intellectual, it was a complete overhaul of his identity. He adopted a new persona, one that was calm, composed, and strategic. Chijioke was no longer the hot-headed, impulsive man he once was. Instead, he had become a shadow, someone who moved unnoticed, gathering power from the sidelines. His obsession with Okoro became an obsession with mastering the art of self-empowerment. He was no longer a man consumed by hatred, he was a man who would regain control, who would rise from the ashes of his former life and show the world the true extent of his capabilities. Years passed, and Chijioke continued to rebuild. On the surface, he had moved on. He even started new ventures, establishing himself in small but profitable businesses, all while keeping a low profile. However, his true purpose was not in the businesses he started but in the careful tracking of Okoro's every move. He studied Okoro's life, his relationships, his finances, his competitors, and even his enemies. Every mistake Okoro made, every careless decision, every arrogant comment, Chijioke took note. He gathered intel like a seasoned investigator, piecing together the cracks in Okoro's empire. It was during this time that Chijioke's obsession with Okoro's weaknesses began to take shape. Chijioke wasn't just interested in exposing Okoro's flaws, he was interested in understanding the psychology behind them. What made Okoro feel invincible? Why did he think he could get away with betraying Chijioke? The more Chijioke understood about his enemy, the more he could anticipate his actions and react accordingly. He realized that Okoro was not invulnerable, he was blinded by his own success, his own arrogance. This blindness would be Okoro's downfall. Just as Chijioke felt that he had regained control of his life and was preparing for the final phase of his plan, something unexpected happened. He discovered a new vulnerability of Okoro, a secret that could completely destroy him. It wasn't just a flaw in his business dealings or his finances. It was personal. Okoro, it seemed, had a secret life, a string of illicit activities that, if exposed, could ruin his reputation and his empire. This was the twist that Chijioke had been waiting for. The discovery was both a relief and a challenge. Now, Chijioke had a weapon, something more powerful than financial ruin or public humiliation. This new information would strike at the heart of Okoro's identity, his carefully constructed persona. It was the perfect weapon, and it would allow Chijioke to dismantle Okoro's world completely. The moment was close, the plan was set, and now, Chijioke had everything he needed to strike. But this time, it would be different. The revenge wouldn't be a single moment of triumph, it would be a slow, methodical collapse, a total unraveling that no one would see coming. Okoro had underestimated the power of Chijioke's transformation, and now, Chijioke was ready to show him exactly how wrong he had been. After years of careful planning, patience, and calculated reinvention, Chijioke was ready for his return. His time in the shadows had given him the perfect opportunity to rebuild his life and develop a strategy that would outlast any fleeting moments of vengeance. He was no longer the impulsive young man who had been wronged by Okoro, he had transformed into someone who understood the true power of patience and manipulation. The setting for Chijioke's reemergence was perfect, a lavish gala in the heart of the city. The venue buzzed with excitement, filled with business moguls, socialites, and influential figures from every sector. It was an event where deals were made, connections were strengthened, and reputations were on the line. The kind of place where Chijioke had once belonged before everything had crumbled. Okoro, as always, was at the center of attention, enjoying the admiration of his peers. He had risen from the ashes of his own past mistakes, standing proudly as the symbol of success. To everyone else, he was a powerhouse, the man who had it all. But for Chijioke, Okoro was just the shadow of a man who had destroyed his life. And now, it was time to see how the mighty would fall. The two men crossed paths at the event, by chance, or so it seemed. Chijioke had come prepared, dressed in a tailored suit that was far from the image of the defeated man Okoro remembered. His demeanor was calm, self-assured, as he casually made his way through the crowd. Okoro, seeing a familiar face, turned and extended his hand for a greeting, but then paused, his smile faltering. He didn't recognize Chijioke. For a brief moment, Okoro's confusion was palpable. The man standing before him was polished, composed, far different from the disheveled figure he remembered. The two locked eyes, and Chijioke could see the recognition slowly dawning in Okoro's expression, but there was no immediate response. Okoro's arrogance was blinding, he still believed he was untouchable. Chijioke played it cool. He smiled, gave a polite nod, and introduced himself as though he were a complete stranger. "Pleasure to meet you," he said smoothly, keeping his voice calm and neutral. No anger, no emotion. He didn't need to reveal who he was, not yet. Okoro, trying to mask his discomfort, played along, treating the encounter as a mere coincidence. But the tension was thick between them. The air felt charged, and Chijioke could almost feel Okoro's heartbeat quicken as his mind tried to piece together the puzzle. Who was this man? Why did he feel a sense of foreboding? As Chijioke walked away, he saw Okoro stand frozen for a moment, clearly rattled by the encounter. The seed of doubt had been planted. But Chijioke knew better than to strike immediately. This was not the time for direct confrontation. His presence alone had been enough to unsettle Okoro, and that was just the beginning. Though the moment was ripe for action, Chijioke understood that true revenge was slow and methodical. The temptation to expose Okoro, to confront him publicly, was strong, but Chijioke resisted. He knew that rushing into things would only play into Okoro's ego, giving him the satisfaction of a quick retaliation. Instead, Chijioke chose to bide his time. The audience, both at the gala and in the narrative, was left with questions. Why wasn't Chijioke acting? What did he know that Okoro didn't? The sense of anticipation built steadily, as the story hinted at something bigger. Chijioke wasn't just there to reveal the truth. He was there to unravel everything Okoro had built, step by step, piece by piece. As the days passed, Chijioke began his subtle manipulations. He re-entered circles where Okoro had influence, quietly dropping hints to the right people. A small, whispered conversation here. A well-timed message there. Over time, the rumors began to spread, small cracks in Okoro's perfect facade that no one had noticed before. Chijioke didn't act openly, but he was far from passive. His every move was carefully calculated to destabilize Okoro without ever revealing his full hand. He started with small doubts, introducing a series of rumors about Okoro's financial dealings, his questionable business practices, and his personal indiscretions. Each whisper, each comment, each half-truth he spread acted as a poison slowly working its way through Okoro's empire. It wasn't just about spreading rumors, Chijioke was planting seeds that would eventually lead to a much larger collapse. He used his old connections, many of whom were still bitter about how Okoro had manipulated and betrayed them, to cast shadows over Okoro's personal and professional life. Chijioke's greatest skill now was his ability to manipulate Okoro's environment, to create a network of doubt, suspicion, and paranoia around him. In boardrooms and back alleys, whispers about Okoro's empire began to grow louder. His lawyer employees began questioning his decisions, and investors who had once flocked to him like moths to a flame now began to hesitate. The pressure on Okoro began to mount, but he couldn't pinpoint the source of the problem. He didn't know that it was the ghost of his past, Chijioke, the man he had once destroyed. As the months passed, Okoro's world became more unstable. He could feel the ground beneath him shifting, but he couldn't understand why. Every decision seemed to backfire. His business deals faltered. His personal relationships soured. His wealth, once seemingly infinite, began to shrink. The once unshakable confidence that Okoro had carried with him began to erode, replaced by frustration and fear. In the shadows, Chijioke watched it all unfold. He had made his move, and now, he was only one step away from the final act. He had created the perfect storm, one that would destroy Okoro without a single direct confrontation. All it took was patience. The audience, Chijioke's long and calculated path had finally brought him to this moment. His presence had shaken Okoro's world, destabilizing everything the once unassailable mogul had worked for. Yet, as any strategist knows, the final blow must come at the most opportune time, when the enemy is at their peak, ready to make a triumph, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath the surface. And this was it. Okoro, ever the confident and arrogant businessman, was preparing for a massive public launch, one that would solidify his place as the undisputed leader in his industry. It was a culmination of years of planning, and his success seemed imminent. The event was to be grand, with powerful business partners, government officials, and media outlets in attendance. For Okoro, it was the moment he would announce his latest acquisition, something that would leave the world in awe and make him untouchable. But Chijioke, always watching from the shadows, knew that this would be the perfect opportunity to strike. The night of the launch arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Guests mingled, champagne flowed, and Okoro stood in the center, basking in his glory. His every word was carefully measured, and his charisma was on full display. He was the man of the hour, surrounded by adoring figures eager to be associated with his success. The moment was ripe for the making of history. But as Okoro made his way to the podium to deliver his long-anticipated speech, something unexpected occurred. Without warning, the spotlight shifted. The large screen behind him flickered to life, cutting into his carefully orchestrated narrative. The audience gasped. Chijioke had made his move, and he was about to expose the truth that Okoro had worked so hard to conceal. Chijioke, using his deep knowledge of Okoro's darkest secrets, had orchestrated a video that began playing on the massive screen. It was a montage, capturing the very essence of Okoro's betrayal. The footage was shocking, not just in its detail, but in its scale. It revealed Okoro's financial crimes, his illegal dealings with shady corporations, and his ruthless exploitation of the people who had once trusted him. There was no escaping it. Okoro's public image was about to be shattered. The crowd fell into stunned silence as the screen continued to unveil the secrets of Okoro's personal life. Hidden affairs, illicit deals, and a web of lies, all exposed in front of his closest allies, business partners, and the media. The very same people who had once admired Okoro now looked at him with contempt, disbelief, and horror. Chijioke's plan had been flawlessly executed. The truth was out, and Okoro's empire was crumbling in real time. But just as victory seemed within reach for Chijioke, the unexpected happened. As Okoro stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and fury, he did something no one could have anticipated. Instead of crumbling under the weight of the exposure, Okoro reached into his jacket pocket and pressed a button on his phone. In an instant, the video playing on the screen froze. The crowd gasped again as the feed cut to black, and an eerie silence filled the room. Then, a new video began playing, one that Chijioke had not foreseen. It was a confession, but not from Okoro's enemies. The video showed Chijioke, his face clear and unmistakable, meeting with a series of individuals in secret locations. These were the people who had helped him engineer Okoro's downfall. The footage depicted Chijioke negotiating and plotting, his every word calculated and manipulative, as he described how he had carefully set up Okoro to fall. The video not only exposed Chijioke's role in orchestrating the sabotage but also detailed his hidden alliances, secretive figures from the shadows who had aided him in bringing down the empire. And perhaps the most shocking revelation, Okoro had known about these plans all along. He had been biding his time, waiting for the right moment to flip the tables. What Chijioke had thought was a slow unraveling of Okoro's life was, in fact, a carefully orchestrated trap. Okoro had been watching him just as carefully, setting up his own counterattack. The twist was dizzying. Chijioke's revenge had been turned against him, and he now found himself standing in the ruins of his own making. The battle of wits had reached a fever pitch, and neither man seemed to hold the upper hand anymore. Amid the chaos, something unexpected happened within Chijioke. Standing in front of the crowd, watching his own reputation crumble before his eyes, he realized something he had never truly considered before: the satisfaction of revenge wasn't as sweet as he had imagined. His plans had worked. He had brought Okoro down, publicly humiliated him, and exposed his deeper secrets. But even as Okoro stood on the verge of ruin, Chijioke felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The thrill of victory, that feeling of justice being served, seemed distant, hollow. There was no celebration, no grand moment of closure. Instead, there was an uncomfortable silence. The reality hit him: his revenge had come at a personal cost. By bringing Okoro down, Chijioke had not just destroyed a man, he had destroyed something within himself. The bitterness of the past, which had driven him for so long, had consumed him. He had thought that making Okoro suffer would heal the wounds he had suffered, but now he realized the truth: revenge was a poison, one that never truly healed the pain. As Okoro, disheveled and broken, stood in front of him, Chijioke could see the reflection of his own suffering in his enemy's eyes. It wasn't just about winning, it was about two men, both consumed by the same destructive forces, now left with nothing but the ashes of their past. Okoro, seeing the look on Chijioke's face, gave a small, almost knowing smirk. For a brief moment, Chijioke wondered if Okoro had known this all along, that revenge, no matter how perfectly executed, was ultimately an empty pursuit. As the event descended into chaos, with Okoro's allies turning their backs on him and the media capturing every moment of his downfall, Chijioke was left standing in the middle of it all. The satisfaction of his long-sought revenge had been fleeting. What now? In the end, both men had been undone by their own obsessions. Chijioke's thirst for revenge had been so all-consuming that it had blinded him to the deeper truths about himself. And Okoro, once a man of power, had lost everything not because of his enemies, but because he had underestimated the forces of karma and the vengeance of the past. The story of Chijioke and Okoro was a tragic cycle, a cycle that left them both broken and scarred. Chijioke's final realization echoed in his mind: revenge was never about justice, it was a trap that ensnared both the avenger and the victim. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe our channel.